Feds will release marijuana rescheduling memo and related documents in their entirety in a response to the lawsuit, you guys. That's right. The Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, has agreed to release documents related to its recommendation to federally reschedule marijuana in their entirety amid litigation over a Freedom of Information Act FOIA request that was filed by a lawyer last year. In quotes, good afternoon and thank you for your patience. A Department of Justice attorney handling the case said in an email to Attorney Matt Zorn on Thursday, the agency had advised that it will release the letter and its enclosures in their entirety. End quote. When the government announces a marijuana rescheduling through a Federal Register notice, he pointed out it would attach the letter and its enclosures to that posting. Zorn last month obtained more than 250 pages of the rescheduled advisory letter and supporting documents sent by HHS and the Drug Enforcement Administration last year, though the vast majority were released only with high redacted form. In a phone interview with Marijuana Moment, Zorn said the new development comes after a little scuffle with the federal government over the timeline in his FOIA lawsuit. The Justice Department had filed a motion to vacate a deadline for summary judgment that was set for January 18th, while Zorn said he would typically accept such a request. He instead filed an opposing brief, and the judge ultimately denied the government's motion. He added that, in quotes, realistically, the lawsuit could have accelerated the timing of the government's scheduling announcement, though it's also possible that just the letter will be released without the DEA immediately announcing a decision in the ongoing scheduling review. Broadly, the documents are believed to discuss new scientific information that has come to light in recent years, which HHS suggests might necessitate rescheduling marijuana, while the Congressional Research Service, the CRS, recently concluded that it was likely that the DEA would follow the HHS's recommendation based on past precedents. DEA reserves the right to disregard the health agency's advice because it has final jurisdiction over the Controlled Substances Act. Recently, DEA reiterated in a letter to Congress that it has final authority on rescheduling decisions regardless of the health agency's recommendations. In quotes, DEA has the final authority to schedule, reschedule, or deschedule a drug under the Controlled Substances Act after considering the relevant statutory and regulatory criteria and HHS's scientific and medical evaluation. It says DEA is now conducting its review. The agency's statement came in response to an earlier letter from 31 bipartisan lawmakers led by Representative Earl Blumenauer, Democrat from Oregon, that implored DEA to consider the merits of legalizing as it's carried out its review. The initial letter also criticized the limitations of simply placing cannabis in Schedule 3 as opposed to fully removing the plant from the Controlled Substances Act. Meanwhile, 6 former DEA heads and 5 former White House drug czars have sent a letter to the Attorney General and current DEA administrator voicing opposition to the top federal agency's health recommendation to reschedule marijuana. They also made a questionable claim about the relationship between drug schedules and criminal penalties in a way that could exaggerate the potential impact of the incremental reform. Signatories include DEA and Office of National Drug Control Policy, heads under multiple administrations led by presidents of both major parties. 2 GOP senators, including the lead Republican sponsor of a marijuana banking bill that cleared a key committee last month, recently filed new legislation to prevent federal agencies from rescheduling cannabis without tacit approval from Congress. A coalition of 14 Republican congressional lawmakers, meanwhile, is urging the DEA to reject the top federal health agency's recommendation to reschedule marijuana and instead keep it in the most restrictive category under the Controlled Substances Act. What do you guys think about this last story of the day? It sounds like we're getting a unredacted version of this FOIA request. Man, I almost feel like this is Cannabiss Kennedy right here.
I think it's huge. I think, that the DEA has been picking and choosing their studies to argue that cannabis should remain in Schedule 1. And if HHS has provided studies that refute that, the DEA is going to have trouble, taking the same stance that they always do. It sounds like they're trying to take a stance. It's illegal, it's criminal, and we need to keep it that way, for other reasons. But, using the science and the research now this is going to bring the argument to a head. It's going to be interesting to see.
No,
isn't this what the LaGuardia Committee concluded, and what the American Medical Association concluded just as Nixon was putting the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act in place? They basically ignored the medical data, which proved what we all know about cannabis. Mm-hmm. And so they need to stop playing this masquerade and deschedule, because it's not dangerous. It doesn't need to be controlled, and it needs to be regulated as a medicinal herb, not a drug. Yep. Drugs are made by drug companies, sold at drug stores, paid for by drug insurance. This is a medicine you could grow yourself, and you could trade amongst your friends. It's an agricultural commodity. It needs to be treated as such.
I totally agree with that.
I think we just need to differentiate between the transparency that they're going to provide versus a change in policy. So they can say, sure, we'll show you everything. It doesn't mean that they're going to move quickly or incrementally towards something that is more scientific based. They've been saying we need more research for however long, and yet we've had medical programs going back more than 30 years in some states. And so the DEA does seem to continue to rehash its recycled talking points about whatever position it wants to continue to maintain. Look, I think the DEA is an incredibly important organization, and I think fentanyl is the greatest risk to this generation of Americans. Mm-hmm. And so I know that they have noble work to do, and they seem to be what we call in my house puppy hogging, where you don't share the new dog, and they really want to maintain some sort of control over how this decision unfolds, what eventual new positions the federal government has. But I'm not necessarily sure why any DEA resources are being allocated towards anything cannabis related, unless we're talking about trafficking of individuals and some of the associated crimes that come with underregulated industries.
Well, I mean,
I think the DEA was only created because they criminalized drugs, right? Back when the war on drugs was created. So we actually don't need them. And I don't think their work is important, because we wouldn't have all these illicit substances and issues if things were legal and safely tested and just freely available. That there wouldn't be an underground or criminal market.
You still have illegal drugs, though. At least you still have all this quirk, this fentanyl, all this stuff that is ravaging our communities.
I believe all drugs should be legal, and that drugs should be approached as just the same as anything else.
I can't agree with that when it comes to fentanyl.
Fentanyl who do you think's putting it out? It's our own government.
No, it's not. It's not. It's the Chinese. It's the Chinese. It comes from China. Okay. It gets shipped in through Mexico and then comes across the border.
I do think what this article, it just sounds super authoritative. The DEA basically saying, yeah, you can send us whatever you want, but we make the final decision and we're going to do what we do. And they've ignored facts and science before and operated in their own interests and the interests of those that serve them. And yeah, they need to stay relevant and keep their jobs. They need something to police and something to regulate, right? So fentanyl's the new big, scary, crazy thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, I've actually known people who've died from it. I'm not negating the issue of fentanyl, but I think criminalizing people who use drugs is not the answer. And that's the issue. The war on drugs is that fentanyl is usually, it's hurting and harming people who are addicts, who are, seeking it out for whatever purpose. Those aren't the people who need to be arrested and criminalized.
Well, I don't think anyone's advocating to be arresting the addicts. I think they're trying to go after the fentanyl suppliers and people that are pushing it on these streets, because if there wasn't it on the streets, you wouldn't have all the tweakers out looking for it.
Well, and I would argue that if those tweakers had access to high quality cannabis concentrates, they wouldn't need fentanyl.
Oh, nice.
I would argue that if the government didn't flood the, poor communities and communities of color with these drugs purposely, then we wouldn't have the addicts in the first place.
And fast food. Don't forget fast food.
Yep. And yeah, exactly. Sugar.
One of the most important things, though, I think that I took out of this is the fact that in the options, the DEA said we have 3 options. They said we can go with rescheduling, we can leave it as a Schedule 1, but they also mentioned deschedule, and I think that it's really important for us to note the fact that they did mention that as one of their options, so they are aware that descheduling is a possibility for them, and I'm going to remain hopefully optimistic that would be the way that they go. Otherwise, I hope they keep it as a Schedule 1, and we can let Congress deal with it and figure it out, because that's my thoughts on it.
That means that the dialogue that we've been having about descheduling versus rescheduling is starting to be listened to.
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
Exactly,
part of the dialogue on here at High at 9.
And Dr. T, I just got one quick question, because they mentioned that in this whole thing it was going to be totally redacted and there was going to be a number of different studies. Are you hopefully optimistic that there may be some type of studies in there that could have some type of medical breakthrough that maybe could help your practice and what you do for patients?
No, I don't think they're going to teach me anything new. I think that, they're always far behind in terms of the cannabis industry and what we're doing. But I do think that they are going to bring up studies that they're not going to be able to pick and choose their studies. Studies can be good and they can be bad, and you can pick the studies that support your point, right? And you can ignore the studies that don't. And so that's what they've been doing for years, is picking the studies that support their point and ignoring those that don't. Now HHS is stepping in and providing their perspective on the studies, and I'm sure it's going to be different than what they've looked at before, what the DA's looked at before. So that's going to really, throw a wrench in it. Of course, I'd prefer descheduling over rescheduling, but I'll take any incremental move and get it out of Schedule 1 for sure. That's the ridiculous thing.
It's important to note that HHS
and me.
It's important to note that HHS was the holder of the U.S. patent US 6630507 on the neuroprotective property of cannabinoids. So, John, they've been doing this work in Bethesda for years to understand. Margaret Eustace, who won the Meshulam Prize this year at the ICRS, is the woman at the NIH who has studied the metabolic breakdown of cannabinoids in our body. So we wouldn't know half of what we know scientifically on cannabinoids if it wasn't for taxpayer-funded research done at our own National Institute of Health. I just wanted to add that.
Oh, man. And on that, we're going to...
Then when they saw the opportunity... Okay, go ahead.
No, I was going to say...
When they saw the opportunity, HHS is like, we're going to patent that, and then we'll license it.
I don't doubt it, and that's why they want to move it to Schedule 3 to give it to the pharmaceutical industry, so that's what they can do with it, make it a synthesized drug.